Um, and you can't build a schedule until you know your kids, because you don't know how long your activities can be. You don't know who you're going to group together. You don't know how many people are going to be in the different places. So you've got to know that information. So when I go to set up my schedule, I use a schedule grid. I'm going to show you one and I have tons of examples on my blog from previous posts. But I'm going to turn you around again so you can kind of see this. I really love color coding, you will notice. And I really wish, there we go. Okay, so this is actually a middle school schedule. But what you're seeing, if I can move the camera where I want it to be, is the students are across the top, so in this case their initials for confidentiality, and times are down the left-hand side. I color code by center in this particular one. I color code different ways, and I'll share some of those with you in the future. But in this particular case, we actually had 2 classes in a class. So we had kids, when we went through their IEPs, we realized we're not going to be able to have all of these kids in a group. It's just going to be not enough people. It's going to be too many people, too much waiting. They're not going to be able to manage it. Some classes could, this one couldn't. So we divided their morning group up so that one did either cooking or gardening and half did morning group, and then they switched. And then we went into a center rotation, and that's really the focus of tonight's blog post, because a lot of you have asked about centers. In middle school, I often will have, in this case, because of the nature of their IEP goals and the things that their curriculum that they were working on in this middle school class, we had a vocational center. We had a DI center, which is what we call direct instruction, not the direct instruction like reading mastery, but that's where we do our small group, intensive, explicit instruction. For some of our kids, we use discrete trials. For some, we're using task analysis. For some, we're using specific reading or math curriculum. But it's our time for really explicit instruction with the teacher. Some people call it teacher time. Some people call it lots of different things. We call it, at this point, we called it direct instruction. Sometimes I change what I'm calling it depending on the class. And then we had an independent work rotation. And we had a teacher in 2 A's because these kids were not independent. So we were actually able to do 20-minute centers. So from 10 to 10:20, the kids went from center 1. From 10:20 to 10:40, they went to center 2. From 10:40 to 11, they went to center 3. And the staff stayed the same, and the kids rotated. And then, as is always the case, there was a lot of prep to do for these guys for lunch. So there's a long prep time. And then they went to lunch at, first thing in the morning. And then we came back, and we had a time where a teacher was at lunch, so we had a table task activity. And table tasks are something that I do often first thing in the morning. You see them up here too, at the very top. The work that you put in independent work systems, I do table tasks. I call them table tasks when the kids aren't independent at it. We'll put all those kinds of visual motor tasks out on a table and have them be able to work with them. It practices their motor skills. It's easier than language-based instruction, so I can provide less staff support during those times a day. And it works really well as we all have to catch up with each other and all get on the same page. So everybody doesn't come to school at the same time. We use table tasks to keep the kids engaged. I don't like them just wandering the room with nothing to do. They're not good at that. So then they went into, because we only had 2 staff, because one is still at lunch, half of them did a job, and half of them had a choice time. And our choice times are not wander around the room, don't do anything. Our choice times are, here's a choice board, make a choice, stay in that area for this amount of time. Sometimes choices are full, so we learn that sometimes I can't have the choice I want. Then they went to specials, and then we did an afternoon set of centers. And we did leisure skills, because these were kids who could not engage themselves independently. So we did art, books, and games. And again, you can see how the color code. Then we had snack, then we had dismissal. What those that is a very similar schedule to a lot of the classes I've done. And I realized, because I added them up the other day, I've actually set up a ton of classes, because in 20 years I've been setting up between 10 and 20 classes a year. And it really added up. So I found that this works well. Sometimes I have to interrupt my center rotation. Sometimes PE comes in the middle of that block. I use the schedule grid. I fill in all the things I can't change. I can't change when they come to school. I can't change when we have to go to lunch. I can't change when we go to recess. I can't change, when we go to specials in those situations. So those go in there, and then I schedule around it. Some kids, it depends. If my schedules, like my specials, change, Lindsay asked, is it the same schedule every day? If my schedule is going to change, like my specials are going to change, it's going to change on each day the specials change, because sometimes you get really lucky and you always have art, music, and PE at the same time every day. It's just a different activity each day. Sometimes they put them all over the map. On those, then I have to have 5 different schedules for 5 different days. When you're thinking about creating your schedule, you've got to think about grouping which kids go together. Sometimes it helps to put them together when they're alike, sometimes when they're different. Sometimes it helps to put kids who are very different together, so one's independent and one's not. The advantage is you can manage them easily. The disadvantage is one kid gets more attention than the other. The flip side is to put the kids who need more supervision together. Makes for one harder group, but it might free your other groups up to have higher level skills that they wouldn't get if they were mixed with those kids. So generally we have a mix of kids in a classroom, and we've got to figure out the best way to make it work. Sometimes I do the morning rotations in a different way than I do the afternoon rotations. So I have different groupings so that I make sure everybody's getting the attention that they need somewhere during the day. And the goal really is to have them together as a group, have them learning to be in a small group and a large group activity during the day at the level that they're able to manage, and keeping them engaged throughout the day in whatever you're doing. So rather than saying, I want to work one-to-one with Ryan, and then Sally's just kind of going to roam around the classroom or hang out in this area where she's not independent, which means she's going to roam around the classroom. I would rather put Ryan and Sally together, have Sally sit by me, give her a task to do, like a file folder or a dot marker activity or something like that that's related to what she's learning, and work with Ryan, and then switch. Because it's going to keep everybody engaged. And it's also going to teach them that I work in small groups, because the world eventually does not exist in one-to-one. So some of our kids need one-to-one, some of them have it on their AP. It's important to know who has it. But sometimes we want to look at, it's not all, everybody does their own thing. We come together as a classroom, and I figure out how to put my skills in those activities. And that's the one thing you have to know, and this is the thing that as I've worked with both teachers and consultants over the years, one thing you really have to know is there's no perfect schedule. There will come a time with your schedule where you have to make concessions, and it may not be what you exactly want it to be, but it'll work. And I used to have a consultant that I worked with, and she's phenomenal. But she used to, when we would go set up classrooms in school districts, she would have to go into dinner and bring the schedules she was working on with her. She always knew what needed to be done, but she always felt like she needed my permission to say, you have an 8 at lunch. You can't have 3 groups. These kids aren't independent. You're going to have larger groups. And it was like, oh, okay. It's not a perfect world, but we can make it work. Because in the long run, we want a schedule that works. It tweaks, it gets changed over time. You figure out what works. Some things work, some things don't. But you really want to understand that you want it to be the best that it can, but you're not going to be able to do absolutely everything you've ever wanted to.